Hey everyone, and welcome to another sidebar. It's Mike again, and this is a continuation of the sidebar I did last time, which was starting my videos, or rather recordings, of my vinyl collection up to this moment and up to this point in time. As a reminder, this is just a series going over various random vinyl I have in my collection. It's not an extensive collection, but given that I've started this collection over the last 2 years or so, I'd say it's pretty hefty for that time period and being just a beginner in vinyl. So this is a moment and an opportunity for me not only to showcase that vinyl, but also just talk about random albums that I enjoy. Some of them we've already talked about on various album fight clubs. Some of them we have not talked about and probably, if I had to guess, won't talk about on album fight clubs. So there's an opportunity just to talk about it at length in that way. So if you didn't see the last one or watch the last one or hear the last one, it was the last sidebar I did. There was one before Cody's that he just did. And it's all my collection of rap records in my vinyl collection. This time I'm moving to my heavy metal collection, or at least what I consider to fall into that category. You can argue some of these maybe wouldn't fall into that category, but if I had to throw it in a lane, I would throw it down heavy metal. Now, this is quite possibly, and I think without fail, my biggest grouping of vinyl that I have of my collection. The highest percentage has to be heavy metal records, but that's largely because if you've noticed or seen my last sidebars prior to my record series, I did discographies of Metallica, Slayer, Contortionists, and Periphery. So all of those discographies fall into heavy metal, obviously. So that's like 25, 30 records right there, on top of all the stuff I'm about to talk about. I will not rehash Metallica, Slayer, Contortionists, Periphery. I did that on those episodes. If you're so interested in my opinions and feelings and looking at that collection as well, that's on that, those episodes. I'm not going to talk about them here because then this video would be doubled, if not tripled in length. But these are the other records in my collection that are also in heavy metal, and having a moment to talk about them. So I'm doing this sort of in time chronological order, starting from the beginning and going to the most recent stuff. I didn't really have any other way to do it other than that. So I say we just get started with an album that we have talked about. In fact, it was our second episode we talked about this album, and that is, of course, possibly where it all did, in fact, start with Black Sabbath, though this is their second record, Paranoid. Unfortunately, this is the only Black Sabbath record I own on vinyl. I would love to fix that. I just haven't gotten around to do it. Obviously, I would love Master of Reality. I would love the first record. Sabotage is one I love a lot. But for me, Paranoid has always been my number one Black Sabbath record, largely because, as we discussed on the Album Fight Club episode, I think this thing is just bar for bar, track for track, the best thing Black Sabbath ever did. The opener, War Pigs, is in a grouping of songs I call Mike's Perfect Songs, where they're songs that literally have nothing wrong with them. We're actually going to get to another one. In fact, it might be my favorite song of all time, but we'll talk about that when we get there. Yeah, War Pigs, not only as an opener, but just a song, is one of the greatest achievements, I think, in heavy metal music. Obviously, there's so many infamous tracks on here: Paranoid, Iron Man, Hand of Doom, and then Fairies Wear Boots, which is also one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs, one of my favorite closing tracks on an album. Definitely my favorite closing. Well, I was about to say my favorite closing Black Sabbath track, but then I remembered Into the Void exists, and Into the Void's just better than Fairies Wear Boots. But I do love Fairies Wear Boots. It's an amazing record. This is one of those records that if you're a heavy metal fan and you've got a vinyl collection, it kind of just like needs to be there. And so luckily I have it. I would also argue Master of Reality needs to be there, and I don't have Master of Reality, but I'm hoping to fix that eventually. So didn't start with Paranoid as far as heavy metal goes, but Black Sabbath is obviously often credited with being the band that did sort of start the sound of what heavy metal would become. Moving on from there, a band that shortly came thereafter from Black Sabbath is Motorhead. This is Overkill. This is my favorite Motorhead record. Again, this is another example of this is the only Motorhead I have on vinyl, which is a real damn shame. I wish I had Ace of Spades and other records. But Overkill, I got this for pretty cheap on like Walmart or something, so I had to pick it up because I do like this record a lot. Overkill, the song, is actually my favorite Motorhead song. I think that thing is just unbelievably awesome. But also, where is it? Damage Case, love Damage Case. Just Awesome record. Not quite one of my favorites though. I think it is really good. I think it is really cool. Motorhead's never been one of my favorite metal bands. They've got like songs here and there that I think are just like metal anthems. But overall, if you take their whole discography into it, I'm not a huge Motorhead fan. But in the case of Overkill, this record in particular, I think it's pretty amazing stuff. Another thing you don't often consider is that Overkill was a three-piece. Obviously, Lemmy's quite infamous, but sometimes you just forget the fact that certain bands only had like three members in them, and Motorhead was that case. So just cool stuff. Obviously, Lemmy is a metal icon, a metal god. He unfortunately passed, but at least he left behind some killer stuff, including this record. And again, it is an example of one that I would love to have more Motorhead. I just haven't gotten around to it because unfortunately I can't get metal records for free. I wish I could, but I can't. These next two are ones that we have discussed at length on one of our Album Fight Club episodes because they were the two Album Fight Club records in question, and they were Screaming for Vengeance by Judas Priest and, of course, Painkiller by Judas Priest. I'm going to talk about both of these pretty quickly. We did a whole episode on these two records, so check that out if you haven't. Obviously, if you did hear that record or that episode, I do prefer Painkiller. Scream for Vengeance is my number 2 with a bullet, but for me, Painkiller is just like, for a band to come out of hiatus, not as much hiatus, but just like having released this in the 80s and they go through their years and they released Defenders of the Faith, which is a great record, and Ram It Down's pretty good, but the way Painkiller, just like such a shot of adrenaline. It's quite amazing, quite beautiful. It's a record that never gets old to me. I mean, the opening track, Painkiller, is also a Mike's Perfect song. It's not the one I was referring to, but it is one that's like just absolutely killer. So I do own both of these on vinyl. They're the only two Judas Priest I own on vinyl. That is also something that I would love to correct someday. For now, though, I'm happy owning these two because if I were to own two records from Judas Priest and only be able to own two, these would definitely be the two I would want. Now we get to pretty heavily 80s stuff. And I know, Judas Priest was 80s, Painkiller was 90s, but they were both Judas Priest, so I lumped them together. Another band where this is the only record of theirs I have, and I would love to correct that, but that would be Death, Leprosy. Why is this the one? Well, this is the one because Symbolic I can't find anywhere for like under $100. I don't know why. I'm pretty sure it was a different record label that did Symbolic, and so they repressed all of these. I forget who this was. I'm sure I could find out. Relapse. So Relapse did all the other records pretty much, and they repressed all the other records. So you can get all the other records for like $20 each, which in the vinyl world is pretty reasonably priced. But Symbolic, man, Symbolic is easily my favorite Death record, and you can't find that thing anywhere less than 100. So I'm not buying that record for $100. I love it. I don't love it that much. Leprosy, though, is one that this is actually the first Death record I ever heard. Probably my second favorite, although I do really love Human. I mean, it's Death. Obviously, all the records are amazing. But Leprosy, to me, is kind of just the best of early Death. Everything before Human, so like Spiritual Healing, Leprosy, Scream, Bloody Gore, I think it's the first one, if I'm not mistaken. So it's great stuff. I mean, my favorite... sorry, just had a brain fart. My favorite Death song is Pull the Plug, which comes on Leprosy. That song is just, God, that song's so good. Although, like I said, it's Death. All their stuff's great. They never made a bad album. Unfortunately, Chuck died, so maybe later down the line they would have made a bad record. But in the time period we had them, they didn't make anything bad. And this record's just absolutely killer. Great, 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 heavy, dark death metal from like 80s era. And very much like in the same lane as Slayer, where like you hear it and it sounds evil, it sounds sinister. Metallica, you listen to Metallica, it sounds fast and it's heavy, but it doesn't sound like evil per se. This thing, this record's evil. Like you hear it, you hear the violence and the death and the gore of this album. And I mean, admittedly, that's kind of why I love it. It's because it's just so unabashedly metal, and I think that's great. Moving on from there, another record we talked about extensively, and arguably one of my favorite records of all time is, of course, Megadeth's Rust in Peace. I kind of went off about it on the Megadeth episode. I think this is easily Megadeth's best record. I think this is easily one of the best records from the Big Four, probably top three. If for me personally, Rain and Blood is my favorite of the big four. But if someone came to me and said Rust in Peace is their favorite, I'd be like, I totally get it, because this is possibly my number two. I'd have to really break it down and think about it. But obviously, I mean, this thing is just so good. And to put another caveat on it, easily my favorite record of the, well, I don't know, I said that kind of weird, but I would say this is definitely up there in terms of like my favorite albums ever. Easily top 10, maybe top 5. It's just so good. And I think what really makes it great was the lineup that you had, which included Dave, of course, Dave Mustaine, Marty Friedman, Nick Menza, and David Ellison. Just incredible lineup. My favorite Megadeth lineup. They would go on to do Countdown to Extinction, which is also an amazing Megadeth record. Just the guitar work and the sound of this record. I mean, Holy War's The Punishment Due, another perfect Mike song. Easily my favorite Megadeth song. Possibly my favorite album opener of all time. And I know I said that earlier with War Pigs, but man, does Holy Wars just like nail what metal is. If someone says metal music, one of the first things that comes to my mind is Holy Wars, because it's just incredible. But just the line of Holy Wars, Hangar 18, Take No Prisoners, Five Magics, you flip the record, Poison Was the Cure, Lucretia, Tornado of Souls, Dawn Patrol, Rust in Peace. Like that line of just records, that tracks back to back to back to back. One of the best runs on a metal album ever. In some ways, I think all metal albums from this era should have sounded like this in terms of guitar. Just so good across the board. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's any issue with it. Like Cody, I love a lot of this. Unlike Cody, I don't think that Peace Sells is better than this, but I mean, Peace Sells is also an amazing record. Unfortunately, I don't have that one on vinyl, but it's Rust in Peace. I don't know what more to say other than if you need even any more elaboration, just go listen to the Megadeth episode, because I'm pretty sure I spend like an hour talking about Rust in Peace. I do have one other Megadeth record, and like I said, it's not Peace Sells, it's not Countdown, it's not any of their early stuff. It's actually one of their newer records, which is Dystopia. And the reason I have Dystopia is because I found it at my local record shop for like $15, and it was in very, very good condition, almost like sealed condition pretty much. So I picked it up because I was like, whatever. I'm not a mega fan of this record. I think it's got some killer tracks. The Threat Is Real, I think, is a cool opener. God, what is it? There's one on here I haven't listened to in a while, so I don't remember exactly which one it is, but there's one song in here I think is a really great Megadeth song. It's good as far as newer Megadeth goes, like post Endgame Megadeth. I'd say this is one of the better ones. It's not Super Collider, thank God. It's not 13, thank God. It's good though. It is good stuff, and I don't really have much to say about it other than I own it on vinyl. I think I've listened to it once, and then that was it. I would be inclined to go back to listen to it because I haven't listened to it in a while. I don't really have much to say other than I have it on vinyl. There you go. So this is where the argument can come in of these guys, you know, maybe they're not heavy metal, maybe they fall into something else, but I mean, I don't know where else to put them other than maybe rap, but I already did my rap episode, so I don't know. Also, two records we have extensively talked about at length because we did a whole Album Fight Club episode. That would be Rage Against the Machine, self-titled, and Evil Empire. We actually had Jason guest on that episode. I don't remember what I said in terms of which one I preferred. It might have been Evil Empire. I will say though, Evil Empire has Bulls on Parade. Depending on the day, that's my favorite song of all time. It just kind of hits me in a place in myself that no other song can hit. And every time it comes on, I want to break things and potentially kill people, which sounds awful, but it's just the primal nature of what metal music and heavy music can do. But self-titled has Freedom on it, which also one of the greatest closers of all time. So I'm going to have to revisit that episode and figure out which one I did. I don't know in the moment. Obviously, both these records are absolutely phenomenal and absolutely amazing. I wish I had all of Rage's albums on vinyl. Obviously, there's only two I don't have, which is the Covers album and Battle for Los Angeles. I hope to get them someday. Here's the, whoa, almost let that one fall. Here's the backs. They're amazing. They're great. This one, I would say, if you're going to get one, definitely get self-titled. Self-titled, I think, just has the better sort of like approach. Personally, I think Evil Empire is the preferred one for me, but you can't go wrong with either of them, and you can't really go wrong with anything Rage. So if you see any of their records at a reasonable price, I mean, you should immediately buy them, because why wouldn't you? Sorry, I'm taking a moment to put them over there. Now we're moving into 2000s. Rage was late 90s, early-ish 90s. Didn't quite make it in 2000s, although they did with the Covers album. Now we're officially in 2000s, and specifically 2001 with Toxicity by System of a Down. I don't. It's another moment where, like, what can I really say about this record other than it's quite amazing? It does a lot great. Easily my favorite System of a Down record. I think it's one of the greatest metal records of the 2000s. I mean, easily one of the most influential and famous. So many killer songs on here. I mean, Chop Suey and Toxicity, the title track, and Aerials, which might be my favorite System of a Down song. Yeah, I mean, I look at the track list, and it's insane to think that all these songs are on this album. And the thing is that this thing just flies by, because some of the tracks are like 2 minutes long, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but it's amazing. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's very strange that it did come out on 9/11. Of course, anything that came out on 9/11 is kind of weird in hindsight, but then again, we didn't know it was really going to happen. I mean, God Hates Us All by Slayer came out on 9/11. Talk about a really weird album to come out on 9/11, but System of a Down, Toxicity did come out that day. So early 2000s, came out in 2001, and I think it kind of set the tone for the entire decade in terms of what metal music could be. Obviously influenced a lot. I think there's a clear reason why. It's phenomenal. It's great. If you haven't heard it, you should listen to it, or at least try to. You'll know by the first song if you're into it or not. Prison Song will come on, and you'll either go, man, this is really cool, or man, I hate this, I need to turn it off. But you should know by then. And I'm sure if you're not even a System of a Down fan, you've heard Chop Suey and possibly Toxicity as well. And so I've only got 3 records left, and this is moving into the 2010s with basically the sort of musings of metal at the time. Obviously, I've covered Periphery and Contortionists, which would otherwise be here in this moment, but there's 3 more records I just want to briefly talk about. They are in my collection. I'm very happy I have them, because, I mean, in the case of the Human Abstract's Digital Veil, which, I mean, it's unfortunate that this is a band that broke up after this record, and I really wish they didn't, because I think this record, one, is amazing, and what's funny enough is that this was actually my first metal concert, was the Human Abstract, Periphery, Contortionists, and somebody else. I can't remember who it was 4 bands though, which is pretty cool. But I mean, this record is so goddamn good. If you haven't heard it, it's more of like a proggy gent, although gent is already prog to begin with. So I don't really know how to describe the Human Abstract other than they were really, really good at what they did. I think their opus, now that they are no longer a group, was in fact this album, Digital Veil. Such killer songs on this thing. And I just want to highlight, I haven't been doing this with the other records because they're all just stark black. This one is actually a green and a black split, which is pretty cool. I like it. If you haven't heard this group, I would just say listen to the song Faust. It is unbelievable. Such a killer track. Easily my favorite track by them. I think it's easily their best. But other songs in here, Complex Terms, Digital Veil, Holographic Sight is amazing. I think this record is really great. It's actually a gatefold, which I just remembered in this moment. There's really not much to look at though, so I'll just show it off quickly. Like I said, not much to look at, but not to say anything against what this record is or what it has on it. It's quite phenomenal. It is sad that they broke up and didn't make any more music, but you know, what can you do? Bands break up. Bands eventually don't see it anymore or get tired of it, and okay, fine. You know, it happens. The final 2 records are pretty big ones for me. They're from a band called Between the Buried and Me, which, depending on the time in which you hear this episode, it was the one we just recorded in terms of our album Fight Club. One of those being the album Colors. As I mentioned on that episode, Colors is a top 5 album of all time for me. It just does so much, does so many incredible things. Yeah, on some days it's my favorite metal album of all time, although Rain and Blood is also there, so it's a death match between those two. But man, this thing just, it is a sonic journey from beginning to end. And I talk about this on the episode, but there's not quite an album that builds to a moment quite like Colors does when it builds to the song White Walls. Um, it feels like the entire album builds to that moment on White Walls, in like the 9 minute and 30 second mark, where he yells White Walls, and it's the breakdown, and like I can't think of another album that like builds to a moment like that, and it just builds to it so well. The journey of Colors from track one to the end, I just love taking it every time I hear it, and I love it. I love it to death. It's a top fiver for me. It's kind of hard to see because obviously it's a black cover and the glare doesn't help at all, but obviously you got the rainbow effect. Just brilliant. I've seen this album played live from beginning to end twice at this point. And if Between the Buried and Me decides to do it again for a third time or a fourth time, I'll probably go see it again because I never get tired of hearing this thing covered or played live from top to bottom. It's that good. It's that amazing. I'm very glad I have it on vinyl because, like I said, it's one of my favorites of all time. Even besides being metal, it's like just one of my favorites in any genre. Finally, the last album. It's another Between the Buried and Me. I only have two Between the Buried and Me. Again, I would love to solve that one day, but that would be Parallax 2. Now, this is my second favorite Between the Buried and Me album. Top goes to Colors 1. I'd probably say Colors 2 is my third at this point, but Colors 2 is not moving above Parallax 2. Parallax 2 is so good. I feel like in many respects it's underrated when it comes to Between the Buried and Me. I don't really see why. To me, it's so obviously like one of their best. I actually had the pleasure of seeing this whole thing played front to back live. And that's another example of if they ever decided to do another tour where they do Parallax 2 again front to back, I'm there. You got me. No problem. I'll be there. I'll pay anywhere within reason to go see it, and I'll drive pretty good distance to go see it as well. Anything above 4 hours, 3 hours even, I'd kind of question. But I drove Charleston, which from my location is like 2.5 hours. Did not regret it at all because seeing this thing live was absolutely phenomenal. It's so good. You've got Astral Body, Lay Your Ghost to Rest, Extremophile Elite. Oh my God, Extremophile Elite is such a good song. Telos, which has one of my favorite breakdowns in like any song ever. And then, of course, Silent Flight Parliament. It's one of their best closing tracks, even though technically Goodbye to Everything Reprise is the closure track on here. I'm going to argue Silent Flight Parliament is actually the closing track on here. And what's cool about this is it is colored vinyl. You got this sort of like pinkish pattern with a little bit of like dirt grime on it, is how I explain it. And the other one is a light blue vinyl. It's pretty cool. It's also a gatefold. So, again, not tons to look at, but it is something. Now, Between the Buried and Me is very heady. They're a very heady band. They talk about very complex things. Sometimes their complexity is something I don't quite understand or can't follow. I don't quite know the story of Parallax 2. It's a concept album like a lot of their albums are. Parallax 2, I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but I love it regardless. I don't really need to know the story, I would argue, to really follow it and really love it. And I do. I love it. I think it's amazing. And I wish I had Parallax 1 on vinyl and Colors 2 on vinyl, but maybe one day I will solve that issue as well. So those are the records I have in my collection that are of the heavy metal genre. Obviously, like I said, Metallica, Slayer, Periphery, Contortionists, I also have all those records. So if I were to cover all those right now, this video would be 20 more minutes probably. Obviously, though, I have covered those records at length on the sidebar episodes I did for each of those. So if you're so interested, please go check those out. If you didn't listen or watch the rap genre vinyl collection video or recording, go ahead and listen to that. If you haven't listened to our latest album Fight Club, go listen to that. There's a lot of stuff you can go examine and talk about and look at. So please feel free to do so. But until then, this will be me signing off. It's Mike. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. See you on the next album Fight Club or sidebar, whatever it is. But whatever it is, until then, have a good day and be well.